This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent disruption to energy supplies, we've seen a constant stream of headlines describing the decline of European industry, which has suffered the strongest production downturn in more than 30 years. But now there's tentative signs that suggest things may be taking a positive turn. Across the euro area, PMI, which measures the economic health of the manufacturing sector, is on the rise. And this month, in Germany, industrial output rose by more than expected. So, in this video, we're going to explain why Europe's manufacturing sector has suffered in recent years, why things might be on the up, and why this all matters to Europe. We're getting remarkably close to 1 million subscribers, and currently 72% of you haven't yet subscribed. So lend us a hand and subscribe today. Let's start with some context. While lots of commentators often suggest that Europe has been essentially deindustrialized and offshored all of its production to countries like China, manufacturing remains and has long been an important sector of the European economy, and many EU countries continue to maintain impressive industrial bases. For example, in Germany, Czechia and Slovakia, the manufacturing sector will contribute approximately 20% to their GDP, while most Central and Eastern European countries see contributions ranging from 15 to 20%. In the aggregate, manufacturing plays a significantly larger role in the EU economy compared to other rich nations, which have, generally speaking, seen more acute episodes of deindustrialization. On average, manufacturing accounts for 16.4% of the EU's total GDP, in contrast to just 11% in the US, and provides jobs for 30 million people, compared to only 13 million in the US, with the Eurozone accounting for 12.2% of the total global industrial output. However, since mid-2022, Europe has suffered somewhat of an industrial recession, and its share of the global industrial output is expected to decrease to 10% by 2050. So, what exactly has been causing this manufacturing downturn? Well, the way we see it, there were at least 3 key reasons: high energy costs, low domestic demand, and cheap Chinese imports which have flooded the European market. Let's start talking about high energy prices. Obviously, energy prices across the world, but especially in Europe, shot up in the aftermath of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. While prices have come down a bit from their 2022-23 peak, they're still higher than pre-2022 levels. And, more importantly, they're still a fair bit higher than some of the EU's competition, like the US and China. This has been pretty bad for European industry, because the competitiveness of your industrial products depends on the cost of your inputs, especially energy. Production in many key energy-intensive sectors like chemicals and steel have tumbled to record year lows, and in Germany, such energy-intensive companies are now producing 20% less than before the war. This has led to plants shutting down and factories carrying out mass layoffs, as European industrial companies struggle to compete with rising costs. So, you get the idea. Unsurprisingly, high energy prices aren't good for industrial competitiveness. But on top of that, the sharp uptick in inflation we saw in 2022 and 2023, driven both by a spike in consumer demand post-pandemic and a surge in commodity prices after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, meant that European real wages turned negative and were down about 6% by the end of 2022. While real wages are now growing in many European countries, they're not growing very fast, and in the aggregate, European real wages are still lower than they were pre-pandemic. These steep declines in real wages have led to sluggish consumer demand for goods, because domestic demand obviously falls if people don't have the money to buy as many things, but also because real wage declines and geopolitical turbulence dampened consumer confidence. Anyway, the third big reason that European industry has struggled recently is China. Chinese industry has been moving up the so-called value chain and now produces not just cheap plastic trinkets, but also cutting-edge tech like electric vehicles, passenger jets, and even high-tech semiconductor equipment. This means that Chinese companies are now competing directly with their European counterparts. But in part because the Chinese government actively devalues the yen, Chinese exports are difficult to compete with. This has become most glaringly evident in the EV industry, where Chinese upstarts like BYD have suddenly started squeezing out established European automakers like Volkswagen. This tension has been made more acute by what some analysts call China's overcapacity. In other words, the fact that Chinese companies are producing more than is required by their domestic market, which creates a glut of exports. With all that being said, Europe's manufacturing is still far from a lost cause. For example, if we look at manufacturing as a share of GDP across European economies, while it has fallen slightly, this really has only been a mild decline. Take Germany, for example. The latest data from 2023 reveals a rebound in manufacturing from the previous year, which now constitutes 18.54% of the country's GDP, which is just 1.5% below Germany's historic average of 20%. Speaking in relative terms, this decrease is much less than in the last period of deindustrialization, where Germany's manufacturing share of economic output fell from 24.8% at the start of 1991 to 21.9% 2 years later, a fall of nearly 3 points that would be compounded by a further fall of 1.5 points in the subsequent years. The point we're trying to make here is that grandiose claims about Europe's total deindustrialization might be slightly overblown, and there are at least a couple of reasons to expect European manufacturing to recover in the near future. First, Europe's recent pivot towards increased defence spending could help revive its manufacturing base, especially if Europe decides that all this new money is best spent domestically, rather than on, say, American-made weapons. For context, Trump's abandoning of Ukraine has forced European heads of state to commit to big spending programs to beef up their country's military capacities, whilst industry leaders are exploring how Europe's existing supply chains can be repurposed for defence needs. Volkswagen, for instance, which closed 3 factories in Germany last year, laid off tens of thousands of staff, and sell 500,000 fewer cars in Europe a year compared to pre-pandemic levels, have reportedly said that they're open to building military equipment for the German army. Second, European energy costs are expected to continue their recent decline thanks to investment in energy efficiency, increased renewable energy production, and new supply of American liquefied natural gas imports, which, if continued, could lead to a 9% reduction in European gas prices by 2030. This would be great for European manufacturing, and manufacturing sectors in countries who've managed to maintain low energy costs are actually doing pretty well already. Spain, for instance, which enjoys pretty low energy costs, largely thanks to its extensive renewables network, has seen its industrial production rise since the pandemic, and manufacturers have been reporting solid growth in the past few months. All in all, it does look like the talk of Europe's total deindustrialization might be a bit overblown, or at least premature, and Europe looks surprisingly capable of defending itself. At TLDR News, we're always trying to help you learn more about the world around you. Luckily for us, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, shares this same commitment, with thousands of lessons in maths, science, programming, and AI. And not only that, their interactive lessons teach you by doing, instead of just asking you to mindlessly memorize stuff. This helps you build your critical thinking skills and become a better thinker. For instance, Brilliant's newly updated maths courses help you establish a strong foundation in algebra. Then helps you build on this, teaching you how to conquer calculus, all while maintaining an emphasis on problem solving and reasoning. The thing I like best about this, though, is that their mathematical courses help you develop your mathematical intuition and fluency, skills that you can use in the real world. As we've told you before, data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, or you can click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.